Alright, and welcome to how to not to repair a rod bearing failure. So, to start this out, if you saw the last video, I ran low on oil and had a rod bearing failure. What I'm about to do is something you should generally not do because it is a hit or miss on whether it will work or not. So I fully expect this to fail again at some point in time, maybe even a few hours from now. This is not a permanent solution. This is a temporary solution to get this thing running and driving for just around the house, driving to work and back, anywhere from further than like 100 miles from my house. I wouldn't trust this thing. You have to understand that what I'm doing is almost any engine builder will, or engine rebuilder would be cringing and yelling at the screen because this is not the correct way to do this, but because of how it failed and what I saw, I'm going to try this, and it's cheaper than me and physically easier for me to do this than to put a whole engine in it. The cheapest engine I can find around me for a long block from a junkyard that they say is running and driving, or running, is about $300. And then there's the labor involved of trying to change this engine. I think I stated in the last video, this engine was low on oil, but the idiot light on the dash never came on. Again, I don't know if it's working or not. Couldn't tell you. Probably doesn't help that when I was getting on the highway, I was at like 6,000 RPM with this thing, just trying to get up to speed. And I think that's probably where it hurt it, because I was just cruising on the highway when I started hearing the knocking. And that's when I got off the highway. It got worse. I think it tried to lock up on that one cylinder, but instead of actually locking up, it just destroyed the bearing. Like, pushed it out. There was the kibbles and bits in the pan that you might have saw. And I think it spun halfway, stopped, and then just like banana peeled itself into the pan and then just knocked. So before I did anything, and before we go down and look at the crank, I did grab a new rod bearing. FYI, I spent in total about, I think, $80 in parts. Main bearings and rod bearings. I bought 2 bolts on eBay because I'm going to replace the rod bolts. I don't trust them, even though they don't look like they had that much heat into them. But I did grab one of these rod bearings and just put it in this cap just to see if it actually will hold or be easily spin. But because if you look at it, it's, I don't know how well you can see it. You look at it, there's some beading on this rod cap, but not terrible. And there's no real deep lines of the bearings like spinning consistently. I think it spun like halfway and stopped. So I can, and this is the other reason why I tried this, is these bearings have no keyway. But I can grab a bearing and it clips into the rod, which means it will not move. So the circumference of the rod is probably still okay for me to try this, and this bearing might not spin as long as I clean up the crank good. So that's a good sign that I can probably get away with this. These are just standard bearings, standard mains, standard rods. Not changing the oil pump. So I'm gonna go underneath and we're gonna look at the crank for the moment. A couple other things is a lot of parts are back ordered. So sorry if I have the light in your way. So there's a screen in this plastic pickup tube. I got as much bearing material out of this pickup tube as possible. There's still like some rattling around like a maraca. But the thing is, this thing is on galactic back order, and I do not feel like waiting almost 2 months. So that's not happening. Under here, you can, it might be kind of hard to see. It is probably really hard to see. The crank for that rod bearing is not great, but I can't feel any deep grooves in it. Definitely got beat up a little bit, and there's some specks of bearing stuck to the crank. And this is where this will generally you don't want to do. The other part of this, sorry if I have the light in the way. The other part of this is it actually didn't spin enough to put that much temperature in the cranker rod. So if you kind of look from the rest of the motor, it's all like caramelized, which is good. You can kind of see on the crank there and on the rod, which is up out of the way at this moment. Kind of just sitting in there. The crank has gotten some heat into it, considering that it's blackened a little bit, but it's not blued, and the rod's not blued, which means a tremendous amount of heat did not go into it, but it did seed some. At this point in time, I don't think I will have another failure for a while, because this thing did not run for very long since I heard it. But what I'm going to do is grab some emery cloth. I have some fine and rough stuff, and I'm going to sand that journal down the best that I can feel it, so there's nothing there to grab the new bearing. And we'll put that one back together, torque it with the new bolts I have, see how it feels. If it feels okay, I'm going to do the rest of them, and then put it all back together and see how it sounds. Again, I have no idea if the oil pressure light works, don't work. I'm going to try this and see where it gets me. I don't know where I'll leave off next, but what I'm going to do right now is sand the crank as best as I can, smooth as I can, and then I am going to put that one together and see how it does. One thing you have to understand with these rods, they are fractured rods, so the rod that came off of it has to go back on it, because if not, the circumference of that circle is not round anymore. It will just not work. It's a fractured rod. You cannot interchange the rod caps. But I will change out the bolts for that one. So I'm going to sand that, put that one together, see how it feels. Feels okay. Then I'm just going to hot swap all the other bearings and then put it back together. So again, this is not the correct way to do this. Sorry for my poor camera work. I'm going to try and do this kind of fast, because I don't want this sitting for any longer than it has to. This might blow up in my face, but that's fine. I already know I'll probably have to put a motor in it anyway, which I was completely and utterly expected to do. So let me sand that and see where we leave off on. Okay, so here's where I'm at with this. I smoothened the #1 rod bearing journal on the crank. There'll be a picture up there that I have. So that one was not terrible, but not great. The one portion of it felt rough, kind of like I don't know how to explain it. Kind of like a gravel road, but kind of not. You can feel it, but your fingernail wouldn't stop over it. But you could feel how uneven it was. So, with the little bit of emery cloth I had, I sanded that down, cleaned it all up, and changed all the rod bearings right now. So, as you can see here, here's all the rod bearings. You can kind of see. #2 was kind of right on the line of spinning and destroying itself. Kind of see, this was #2. You can see just how it was starting to push the bearing material out. This one actually spun 1/4 away and then stopped, but I didn't see any damage on the rod. The crank didn't seem all that bad. It actually felt really good and didn't see any real damage. The only thing about these bearings I don't like is that there's no locking tab in them. So I'm surprised they'll stay in the rod. So the new bearings, they do like kind of clip into the rod by pressure, and they don't feel like they're going to spin at all on all these, even the one that took a shit because of my fault. But you can kind of see the #1, 2, 3, 4, all the rod bearings are changed. They feel good. They don't have any play. This motor spins over just fine. So I'm at the point now. The other rod bearing journals looked okay. No real damage. Just the bearings were looking like absolute poo-poo. So now I have to take down the mains, and because this has a main girdle, I'm debating whether or not to put some sort of support on the front crank pulley, or maybe just leave it as is, because the timing chain might hold it up just fine. From what I can tell, neither the mains or the rods have the locking tab, so this is going to be interesting. Let's see how well the mains look. I'm going to do all the mains, put it up there. We'll put the pan up with the pickup tube, and I'll probably put 1030 in this and see how well it does. So that's all the rod bearings, all in, tight and torqued. The torque spec will kind of be on your screen too. They're inverts, Torx heads, bolts. A little weird. I did change the bolts on that #1 connecting rod, but I did not change the cap, because the cap is that cap that breaks. So there's no machine surface between the two. They are mated together, and you can't swap the caps. So I put new bolts in #1, but the cap's the same, the rod's the same. Actually felt pretty good going together, and there's no obvious play I can feel or see. So do the mains, and then put the oil pan back on, and then fill it with 1030 oil with new filter, and I'll let it run at idle. up to temp and see how well it sounds and how well it does. But I'm going to get to the mains now, and I'll also put the spec on the mains as well. It's like you have to torque it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because every single main cap is on this like girdle. So you take all of them all down at once, which I don't really like to do, being the way I'm changing these, but oh well. The timing chain will hold it up, and the converter and trans will hold the crank up, and I'll just sneak the main bearings out, sneak main bearings back in, and then see what happens when I put oil in it. Okie dokie. Main bearings are done, and the pan's on, it's oil in it, filter's changed. One thing about these main bearings, I had to sneak a wrench in behind or in front of the flex plate to undo 2 bolts on the rear seal cover in order to get that girdle out. Other than that, all the bearings didn't look too bad. I'll probably give you a picture in the video. The main bearings actually looked pretty good, other than the front one, the first one, that actually had some damage to it, but the rest of them were fine. I could have been good with just rod bearings and just threw it together, but I'm glad I did the mains anyway, just for peace of mind. Put 1030 in it. I'm going to prime it first to get the oil circulated. So I unplugged the injectors just because I want to crank it, prime it with oil, and then we'll start it. So, and FYI, I was looking at this. I think the bulb for the oil pressure light is out, because every time you do the key on self-test, the light for the oil pressure is supposed to be over here, right at the end of the full, never comes on, because it should be on when you have it like this. So that explains that. Either the bulb's out or something else is with it. So we're running on hopes and dreams here. So I'm going to crank it with the injectors unplugged. Okay. The only thing I don't know is, with that bearing gone, is if it smacked the valves, and the valves are kind of bent on that number 1 cylinder. It kind of sounds like maybe a misfire going to happen. We're going to see. By that cranking, it wouldn't surprise me if the valves are bent on number 1. Let's try it. I'm gonna run on hopes and dreams. See where we go with this one. Actually not bad at all. No knocking. Sounds like it's got oil pressure. Doesn't sound like it's misfiring. Buy myself a lottery ticket. No chalkboard noises like scratching nails on a chalkboard. Sounds like it's running on all four pretty evenly. No shakiness. Sounds like it's got oil pressure. A little bit valve train noise, but I'm going to, probably because it's got 1030 in it. Leaks? None? You good? Yes? No? Maybe? I know that's all there beforehand. The wrong way to repair a rod knock completed. Hopefully it lasts about a year maybe. Let it do a heat cycle. That actually sounds pretty good. It's not rod knocking anymore. I'm seeing if I can hear it. Nails on chalkboard sound like it's going to lock up, but I'm not hearing that, so maybe success. Too early to tell. Got to do a heat cycle. So far, so good. $134,000 on the clock. I need gas for this thing. Yeah, note to self, the oil pressure light does not come on, so the bulb is probably burnt out or there's some other underlying issue. So, note to self. I have no idea if it's got oil pressure or not. Sounds like it does. Should I physically check it? Yeah. Am I going to? Probably not. But other than that, the wrong way to repair a rod knock. Success? Question mark. Time will tell. Does sound like it runs on all four pretty good. I don't think the valves are bent at all. I might have gotten lucky with my screw up. Yeah. I'll probably leave it off here. If something else happens, I'll put it right after this. But other than that, from here, I'm just going to end it. And see how well this goes for the first week. Okay, to add on to the end of the video, it's been sitting here idling for about a half hour. It's completely up to temp. It's rattling. It was good for a bit until it got up to temp. I probably should have used thicker oil. This is one of the many reasons why you should not do this. I was hoping I could get away with this, but this engine needs to be replaced. You might not can hear it right now. You can kind of hear it, kind of not. It's kind of hard to. It's got a slight knock, and above 2,500 RPM, you can hear it rattle. So, yeah. See if I can. I don't know if you could hear that, but once it gets above 2,500, it starts knocking and rattling. Yeah, I thought this was going to happen. I expected this. So, just like I thought, I'm still putting a junkyard engine in it. Now, the cheapest junkyard engine I could find around me, one has the almost exact identical miles as this one. Just a few thousand more for like 300 bucks. Come to find out, my one coworker has, I believe, one of these engines sitting in his barn that has, I think, 40,000 miles on it from a wrecked Focus his son has. I'm going to see how much he wants for that. If I could get it for 300 bucks, sure, why not? I'm going to slap a motor in this. This is no bueno. You can't hear it, hardly hear it now. Oh, that's painful to hear. Well, that was a $80 try and a swing and a miss. I was running on hopes and dreams, and I didn't have enough hopes and dreams, so that was a fail, and I'm just going to have to change the engine in this eventually. Maybe I should just run it. I'm going to maybe try thicker oil and just run with it until it actually blows up. This thing needs a subframe too. AC compressor, subframe. I might ignore it for a little bit. Drain the oil, put thicker oil in it. Yeah, don't do this. This was a huge gamble and it did not pay off. So I might try some of that Lucas oil stabilizer. Should probably got another thing of oil and filter and change it again with thicker oil. 1540. I don't know, maybe see how it sounds after 1540. I'm putting a motor in this anyway. You look at it. I want to see if my coworker, how much he wants for that engine in his barn. So, yeah.